Okay, well, let me just share my screen now. Can everybody see it? Making sure that nobody has any issues. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm happy that you're joining us today. I'm very excited to share my research with you all. As Dr. McDonald said, I'm a Master Public Health student here in New Mexico State University. And just disclosure, I'm originally from Columbus, New Mexico. I lived there all my childhood, and I still go back there to visit my parents almost every weekend. So it's a community that's very close and dear to my heart. When we think about one of the most, the most important behaviors that could improve health, physical activity is typically at the top of the list. It's very important. It improves cardiovascular fitness, and it reduces the risk for many chronic diseases like obesity, cancer, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Physical activity is particularly important for children because it helps them as they develop, as they're growing older, to develop strong bones and muscles. It also helps to improve performance in school. It helps improve grades and coordination. And it's particularly important for children because if they adopt healthy lifestyle or physical activity behaviors at a young age, they're more likely to continue to have these healthy lifestyle habits as they grow older. Now, what do we mean when we say, that the, what do we mean when we say that being a child is physically, or that a child is physically active? Well, according to the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, the second edition, they recommend that youth between the ages of 6 to 17 be physically active for at least 60 minutes every day in a week. A big problem, however, is that not many youth meet these guidelines, especially Hispanic youth. So let me just apologize. Okay. Just I'm managing the recording. Okay, sounds good. So as I mentioned, very few youth meet the physical activity guidelines. In the United States, only about 1 in 4 or 25% of youth ages 6 to 17 meet these guidelines. In New Mexico, the rate is about 26%. And in Luna County, which Columbus belongs in 2019, only about 24% of its high school students met the physical activity guidelines. Now, there are many factors that can influence a child's physical activity levels and their adherence to these guidelines. These factors include parental and child perceptions of the neighborhood environment. So not just the neighborhood environment itself, but the perceptions of the parent and the child. Neighborhood crime and safety can also play a role in children's physical activity, specifically police reported crime and safety, neighborhood safety like lighting, loose dogs, heavy traffic, that sort of thing. Parental factors can also play a role. So for example, if parents play or are physically active with their child, or if they discipline their child by taking away their outdoor playtime. Seasonality or the time of the year can also play a role in children's physical activity levels. For example, during the school year, they may be receiving physical activity in PE class or in recess. And in the summer, they're not receiving that because they're not in school, but they may have more time to go to the park and to go swim, like to the swimming pool or be in a summer program. So their physical activity levels can change depending on what time of the year it is. Socioeconomic status and rurality, they kind of play hand in hand. They can also have an impact on physical activity. Typically, rural communities have less existing community resources for children to be physically active, and individuals living in rural areas tend to have lower socioeconomic status. And now, given our current situation with COVID-19, COVID-19 has had an impact on almost every aspect of regular life. But one thing that we may, that may not be discussed as much is that COVID-19 may be having an impact on children's physical activity. Just for example, parents and children may perceive COVID-19 to be a neighborhood safety threat, so they will not feel comfortable going to the park for fear of transmission of infection, but also the public health measures that are designed to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 may be affecting children's physical activity levels as well. For example, children are engaged in remote learning now, so they're not receiving the exercise that they would typically receive while being in school. So with that said, COVID-19 presents a very serious public health issue in terms of its impact on children's physical activity. So it's important that we address it and identify if this is an issue. So once we identify it, we can provide the necessary interventions to improve children's physical activity levels. So with that said, the purpose of my research, of my thesis, was to determine if COVID-19 had any effect on the physical activity levels of elementary school-aged children living in Columbus, New Mexico. Additionally, another purpose of my thesis was to determine which demographic factors, household characteristics, and household norms are associated with a change in physical activity among children in Columbus before and after the emergence of COVID-19. So moving on to the methods now. And before I proceed, does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, I'll continue on. So our target population resides in Columbus, New Mexico. Columbus, New Mexico is a small rural community located in Luna County. It's a couple miles from the US-Mexico border. And in 2020, the population was estimated to be little less than 1,600 people. The median age in 2020 for the population of Columbus was 31.9. And I put the value here for 2018. I was looking at this particular reference last night, and I noticed that the 2020 census estimates had been provided. So originally I had the 2018 estimates on here, but I find it interesting that in 2018, the median age was 44.1, and just in 2 years that the median age dropped to 31.9. So I think it's just indicative of some of the demographic trends that are occurring in a rural border community like Columbus. 40% of the residents in Columbus are foreign born, meaning they were not born in the United States. And about 35% of the residents are non-US citizens. So this includes legal residents like green card holders, and it also includes undocumented citizens. And all of these non-US citizens originate from Latin America. I wasn't able to get specifics on which country of origin in Latin America they come from, but that's something that I'll look into and provide for my thesis. So I took these pictures last week just to give you an idea of what Columbus looks like. As you can see, it's a lot of desert and just small, a lot of open space, not a lot of paved roads. That on the left is the old, water tower, and in the right, I think it was an old hotel from the Pancho Villa days. So it has its own charm, even though I don't like the desert. I wish there was a few more trees. I took these pictures a couple years ago. I used to work as a lifeguard in Columbus in that small pool that you can see on the left picture here. I worked as a lifeguard for 5 years. So, even before I came to NMSU, I always had an interest in children's physical activity just by working as a lifeguard. I used to provide swimming lessons, private swimming lessons from my own free time to teach kids how to swim, because I thought it was a very important and very fun way to engage in physical activity. As you can see in the summer, the evenings would be very pretty. You can see the rain clouds in the distance, and it would create some very nice views. So our sample population is going to be Columbus Elementary School students living in Columbus. Columbus Elementary School also serves US citizens living in Palomas, Chihuahua, Mexico, which is Columbus's sister city. But for the purposes of this study, we only included Columbus Elementary School students living in Columbus. There was concerns that the school shared that they hadn't been able to have good communication with the students or the parents of the students living in Palomas. So we decided just to focus on the students living in Columbus, which left us with a population size of 121 children. The individuals who completed our study survey were parents or guardians of the Columbus Elementary School students living in Columbus. And our survey was an online survey that we administered through Qualtrics. The survey was available in both English and Spanish. And yes, moving on. So the Columbus Elementary School administration and the teachers of the school assisted with the survey distribution. So much help, much thanks to them, because we wouldn't have been able to get our data if it wasn't for them. We received permission from the Deming Public Schools District to do so, and we received NMSU IRB approval for the thesis on November 2020, which we collected our data the following month, which was December 2020. So how did we recruit individuals? Well, the teachers were asked to send an initial invitation to the parents, guardians of the students living in Columbus, asking them or just letting them know that there was this study going on in the community and if they were interested in participating. We had to do this per school protocol. They wanted to get permission from the parents first before we sent them the survey link. So once parents gave permission to send them the survey link, the teachers sent them the link and they gave them up to 2 weekly reminders to do so. Now, a survey was created using a variety of questions. We used the Godin Leisure Time Exercise Questionnaire, which is a 3-item instrument that measured 15-minute sessions of vigorous, moderate, and light physical activity. And in a systematic review, this Godin questionnaire was identified as the most effective instrument currently available for measuring children's physical activity. We also used the physical activity question in the National Survey on Children's Health. This question directly measured adherence to the physical activity guidelines. So that is, the question asked, during the past 7 days, how many days per week was your child physically active for at least 60 minutes? So our physical activity variables included the Godin questionnaire items, the National Survey on Children's Health question. It also included a question on daily screen time use of children. And I know, daily screen time use isn't a physical activity variable, but I included it here because we provided these sets of questions for 2 time points, which was summer 2019, which represented our before COVID-19 phase, and summer 2020, which represented our, after the emergence of COVID-19. And we chose to have these time points in the summer to also, mitigate the effects that seasonality may have had on children's physical activity. So those sets of questions were provided for those 2 time points. And we also had 2 additional physical activity questions. One of them was the respondents were asked if they perceived that there had been a change in their children's physical activity from summer 2019 to summer 2020. And the other question was asking if there was a change, what was the reason for the change? We adapted household norms and demographic variables from the Salud para Usted y Su Familia study, which is a 5-year multi-site study conducted designed to conduct environmental assessments in border communities in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, including Columbus. And these environmental assessments were on food availability, physical activity, screen time use, and they were designed to help inform future interventions to help address these issues. We also had physical, before I say that, I should say we measured parents' height and weight by asking them directly, what is your height and what is your weight? But we didn't do that with children. Instead, we used these figures from Dr. Lorraine Killian, who she's a professor from the Department of Health and Kinesiology in Texas A&M University in Kingsville. And we got permission from Dr. Killian to use her figures in our study. And we thought that using these figures was going to be a good way to eliminate some of the bias that parents might have given in their response if they were going to measure their children's physical activity directly. So there was figures like this one, for the one that I'm showing, for boys, and there was also a figure for girls. So it wasn't just this figure, but this is what it looked like. Now, unfortunately, I'll say that I don't have any data to show on this yet. As you can see, I have to code each of the responses, and I'm currently working on coding that. So once I have that coded, I'll get the descriptive statistics for this figure for children's body weight chart classification, and then we'll be able to share that data in our thesis defense. So before I move on to the study analysis, I just want to explain how we coded and scored the Godin exercise questionnaire items. So again, it was 3 items measuring 15-minute sessions of strenuous exercise, which was given a score of 9, moderate exercise, which was given a score of 5, and light to mild exercise, which was given a score of 3. So the total weekly leisure activity score was calculated by adding the total for each type of exercise. So for example, if a parent provided or said that one of their children had 1 session of strenuous exercise in a week, 2 moderate sessions of exercise in a week, and 3 mild sessions, well, that's 1 times 9, 2 times 5, 3 times 3, which is 9 plus 10 plus 9, which is 28. So the total weekly activity scores were then classified under the Godin scale score. If the weekly activity score was more than 24, we classified the children as active. If their score was between 14 and 23, we classified the children as moderately active. And if their score was less than 13, we classified them as insufficiently active. So we conducted descriptive statistics for all of our study variables. We used paired t-tests to, we used paired t-tests for 3 continuous outcome variables to see if there was any differences between the summer 2019 and summer 2020 measurements. And our 3 continuous outcome variables were the mean Godin scale score, the mean days per week being active for at least 60 minutes, and the mean daily screen time use. So how many hours per day were they using electronics or on a screen. We used McNamara tests to assess the differences for 3 binomial outcome variables. So these outcome variables were the percentage of children that classified as active in the Godin scale score, the percentage of children classified as insufficiently active, and the percentage of children who met the physical activity guidelines. That is, that they were active for at least 60 minutes every day in a typical week in the summer. Now we're currently conducting analysis on a mixed effect model to identify any predictors that may have influence or might be associated with a change in the mean the continuous outcome variables, so the ones at the t-test. Unfortunately, we're still in progress in this. I think we're probably going to finish by next week. So fortunately, we don't have information to share today on the mixed effect model, but we'll definitely have it for the thesis defense later this semester. And we used SPSS statistics to conduct our analysis. Okay, so just providing some information before we get to the demographics. In total, we had 59 respondents who completed the survey, and they provided information for 87 children, which was about 74% of our total population, the total number of children that live in Columbus and were students in the school. About 60%, as you can see in the table on the left, about 60% of the respondents completed the survey in Spanish, which I think just shows how important it was to have the survey available in both English and Spanish, because a sizable proportion of the respondents used each language. There was 4 of the 59 respondents who did not agree to participate, so they did not go beyond the consent form in the study. So we did not get data for them, but we still recorded their response. They just did not agree to do the survey. And the vast majority of respondents, 96% of them, were the mother of the children. I believe it was only a father and a grandmother who were the other respondents. About 55% of the children that we got data for were boys. So overall, it was pretty even distribution between boys and girls, almost 50-50. Now, the primary language for was Spanish for more than 80% of the respondents and children. So I thought that was very interesting, especially given the fact that almost all children were born in the United States, 96% of them. And, comparing that to their parents or to their respondents, about 60% of them, the majority of respondents, were born in Mexico. Now, 61% of respondents were considered overweight or obese based on their BMI score. Like I mentioned before, we asked for their height and weight directly, and then we used the formula to calculate their BMI score. And about almost a little less than 70% of respondents had a high school education or less. About 3 and 4 or 75%, little more than 75% of respondents had a household income of $30,000 or less. The mean age of the respondents was 32.7, and the mean age of the children was 7.7. The average household size was 4.5 individuals per household. Now, we had household norms. You can see there's 12 household norms, but I initially added all like the actual questions in these tables, but it was a little hard to read. So I decided just to, indicate which household norm question each column belongs to. If you'd like to see these factual questions, I provided them in the appendix, but I'll just read them here for now. Now, the first household norm was when your child misbehaves, do you ever take away his or her outdoor playtime? Majority of respondents said no, 85% of them. The second household norm was when your child misbehaves, do you ever take his or her electronics? Almost all respondents said yes, so that was a much more popular form of discipline. The third household norm was, does it ever seem that the only way to keep your child entertained is to encourage his or her use of a TV, tablet, video game, or other electronics? And it was a pretty even response for this question. Majority of parents said no, but it was almost 50-50. Now moving on to the fifth household norm. It asked respondents if it was hard for them to find time to play outside with their child. Majority of respondents said no, but still a sizable proportion, about 43%, said yes. The sixth household norm was, are there places close by for a child to be physically active? The majority of respondents said yes, that there was places for their children to be physically active that were close by to them, but still a sizable proportion of respondents, about 30%, said that no, there wasn't any places close by for their kids to be physically active. The eighth household norm was, if you're physically active, is it more likely for your child to also be physically active? And the vast majority of respondents said yes, which I think just shows just how important, the parent behavior is in influencing children's behavior, at least the perception of it. The ninth household norm was, is the TV on when your child eats? And it was about a complete even distribution. The 10th household norm was when eating together as a family, is there anyone who uses electronics? The majority of respondents said no. So I think this shows that using the TV, in the dinner table was more acceptable than using electronics like a phone. The 12th household norm was, since March, is there anyone in your family who has shown COVID-19 symptoms? Majority of respondents said no, about 75% of them. Keep in mind, though, that we provided this question, or that the respondents answered this question in December of 2020. So we can assume that this number has probably gone higher since then. 11th household norm were not yes or no questions. They had these 4 responses. And the 4th household norm was, how many times a week does your family do active things together? Majority of respondents said that their family does at least one thing together. It was only about 8% or 7% of respondents that said that they never do active things together as a family. And the 11th household norm was, during a week, how often does your family eat together? And the vast majority of respondents said that they eat more than 3 meals a week together. And there was no respondents that said that they never eat meals together or that they only eat meals together about once or twice a week. Now, these are the physical activity variables. I'll start with the top left figure and just guide you through. So the top left figure measures the physical activity guideline adherence. So how many, were the children active for at least 7 days or at least 60 minutes every day in a week during summer 2019. For summer 2019, you can see that about 19% of children were active for at least 60 minutes every day in a week. And for summer 2020, this number dropped to about 9.3. So it was about a 50% reduction from summer 2019 to summer 2020. Sorry, I keep touching my mouse. Now moving on to the top right figure, this is the mean Godin scale, it's the Godin scale classification. And in summer 2019, based on their Godin score, about 85% of children were classified as active. And in summer 2019, this number dropped to about 70%. So in summer 2020, in summer 2020, this number dropped to about 70%. So only 70% of children were considered active based on their Godin scale score in summer 2020. And moving on to the figure in the bottom left, when asked for their change in physical activity, when asked for the change in their children's physical activity from summer 2019 to summer 2020, about 80% of respondents said that their children's physical activity had decreased as a result of COVID-19, the vast majority of responses, which you can see on the right, bottom right figure. I also find it interesting, though, that there was a couple of respondents that said that their children's physical activity actually increased from summer 2019 to summer 2020. And when asked to describe the reason for their change, some of those that said that their children's physical activity increased said it was a result of COVID-19. So maybe, they had more free time and, not being in school, so they spent more time being physically active. But as you can see, though, the vast majority of respondents believed that the reason for change in their children's physical activity was a result of COVID-19. Okay. Sorry, it's just my computer froze for a while. Okay, so now moving on to the main entree of this presentation. It's the results from the t-test and the McNamara tests. I'll guide you through each of our outcome variables, which they're on the left, the most left column here in this table. I'll start going one by one. So for the Godin scale score, the mean Godin scale score in summer 2019 was about 66 or 67. And this value, the mean dropped to in summer 2020, this mean dropped to about 46, which was about a 20-point difference. And when you look at the p-value, you can see that this was a very statistically significant result. And based on the Cohen's d, it had a small to medium effect size. Now moving on to the second outcome variable, how many days per week were children physically active for at least 60 minutes? In summer 2019, the mean days per week that were spent active for at least 60 minutes was 4. And in summer 2020, this value dropped to about 2.9. So it was about a 1 day reduction that children, 1 day less that children were active for at least 60 minutes. This this difference was also statistically significant, and it also had a small to medium effect size. Now looking at the daily screen time use, in summer 2019, the mean hours per day that children spent on electronics was about 3.2. And in summer 2020, this increased to about, the mean increased to about 5. So it was about a 1.5 hour increase in the use of electronics from summer 2019 to summer 2020. This difference was also statistically significant at a 0.001 level of significance. And this difference had a medium to large effect size. Now moving on to the binomial outcome variables, the percentage of children who classified as active based on their Godin scale score in 2019 was 84.6%. And in summer 2020, this value dropped to about 70%. So it was about a 15-point difference. And this difference was statistically significant at a 0.05 level of significance. The percentage of children that were classified as inactive in the Godin scale score was 3.8% in summer 2019. And in summer 2020, the percentage of children who were classified as inactive increased to about 17%. So it was at about a 13-point difference. And this difference was statistically significant at a 0.01 level of significance. Now, for the percentage of children who met the physical activity guidelines, that is, they were active for at least 60 minutes, 7 days a week. In summer 2019, the percentage of these children was 8.7. And in summer 2020, the percentage of children who met the physical activity guidelines dropped to about 9.3. So it was about a 50% reduction from summer 2019 to summer 2020. But as you can see, based on this p-value, this difference was not statistically significant. Now, what are our results show based on this point? Well, it shows that that there was a statistically significant decrease in the parent-reported physical activity of their children living in Columbus from summer 2019 to summer 2020. Additionally, there was a statistically significant increase in the use of electronics from their children from summer 2019 to summer 2020. So in a nutshell, physical activity went down from summer 2019 to summer 2020 among elementary school age children, and the use of electronics went up from summer 2019 to summer 2020. Now, what factors are associated with the change in physical activity? Well, we're still currently working on the mixed effect model, so you're going to have to stay tuned for the thesis defense to learn more about the factors that might be associated with a change in physical activity. Now, the strengths, the discussion section of the thesis is still currently in progress, so we don't have much to share at this point. But just thinking it through about the strengths, one of the strengths of the study was that we had a very good response rate from the parents of the children from the parents of students of Columbus Elementary School that live in Columbus. We ended up getting about 74% of, we ended up getting data for 74% of all the children that live in Columbus and attended Columbus Elementary School. Another strength of the study could be that the results of this study may be generalizable to other rural border communities that live alongside the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, strength or weaknesses of the study, it's important to consider the fact that there may have been recall bias involved. For one, the physical activity measures of children were parent-reported, and parents were asked to recall their children's physical activity for summer 2019, which at the point that they completed the study was December 2020. So it was about a year and a half that they were asked to recall their children's physical activity levels. And summer 2020 was about half a year. So you have to take into account that recall bias, may have played a role in our results. Additionally, even though the results may be useful in understanding the physical activity patterns of children living in border rural communities like Columbus, the results of the study may not be as generalizable to more urban population centers. So what can we learn from this, and where can this research go further, once the thesis is completed? Well, I think it's important that that future research could focus on actually exploring the impact that the reduction in physical activity among these children had on some of the youth risk factors, so for example, childhood obesity. So instead of, assuming that, or just seeing if the difference in physical activity actually led to, higher childhood obesity, for example, and not just thinking that it may have had, but actually measuring it. Also think it's important to continue exploring children's physical activity patterns, especially as the COVID-19 pandemic becomes more manageable. Once the COVID-19 pandemic becomes more manageable, and children return to school, are children going to revert back to their physical activity patterns before the pandemic, which really weren't that great to begin with, especially in adherence to the physical activity guidelines? So are they going to revert back to their physical activity levels that they used to have, or have they already developed these unhealthier physical activity habits where they're going to continue to be more physically inactive? So maybe we could conduct this same type of study, but just instead of using summer 2019 and summer 2020 time points, maybe we could use summer 2020 or summer 22 time points and summer 2021 time points. I also think it'd be interesting to look at the differences in physical activity levels and the effect that COVID-19 may have had on children's physical activity between rural and urban communities. So I just want to say thank you. Wish I could share more in the discussion portion of my presentation here today. But again, the thesis is still currently in progress, but for a more thorough discussion of our results, keep an eye out for the invitation and the announcement for the thesis defense, which will take place later this semester. We haven't announced a date yet, but once we do, we'll be sure to share that with you all. This is my providing my email here for any of you that have additional questions or just anything that you'd like, if you'd like to continue talking to me about my research here today. I'd like to give some acknowledgements to my thesis committee, Dr. Jill McDonald and Dr. Christopher Soroka, for their support, as well as Dr. Kratsky, who was in my thesis committee before she retired in the end of last semester. I'd like to thank the Columbus Elementary School administration and the faculty for all of their support. I really couldn't have done this study without them. And thanking the Deming Public Schools District as well for giving me permission to distribute my survey through Columbus Elementary School. I'd also like to thank Dr. Lorraine Killian. I apologize for forgetting to mentioning it, or I think I mentioned it earlier, actually, I can't remember. But yeah. She's the professor that gave permission for me to use her child body weight charts in my survey. Here's the appendix that has all the household norms here. If you'd like to, can see them after the presentation. After the presentation, we'll post the recording and the slides in the Sweeter website. And yeah, that's it. Is there any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering, is it normal for activity levels in kids this age to drop off year by year? In other words, did they become less active as they age? And if that's true, how are you going to disentangle that from the effect that COVID-19 had on their levels?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So let me go back to my presentation. Early on in the presentation, I think here. So when I said that in New Mexico, about 26% of the youth ages 6 to 17 meet the guidelines, what I actually did, this resource, or the reference, I should say, had the values separate for children 6 to 11 and 12 to 17. And actually for the percentage of youth or children ages 6 to 11 that met the physical activity guidelines was about 31%. And the number or the percentage of youth ages 12 to 17 that met the guidelines was about 21%. So that, indicates that as children get older, their physical activity levels reduce, which, that goes with what you're suggesting. So yeah, no, I think that would be interesting to see, if future research we'd like to follow up in, the students in our study. Well, that's something that we're going to have to take into consideration. And, just based on the fact that physical activity levels tend to drop as children get older, and I think that's interesting. I definitely have to think about how we could account for that in, the study methodology of a study like that.
It's not like you can go to another community that wasn't impacted and see how much of their levels. Maybe the effect of COVID-19 will be to accelerate that decrease in physical activity, and then do they make up for any of that, or is that just something they live with and the effects of that for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, no, definitely. And just thinking about how something like that would work, if we were to conduct a follow-up study in 2022, for example, well, some of the children that were in elementary school wouldn't be in elementary school anymore. Move on to middle school. So that'd be something else that we would account. Would we just measure like the current student enrollment of Columbus Elementary that live in Columbus, or would we follow up the individuals or for the children that we got data for in this study?
Well, I don't want to monopolize the question, so anybody else have questions, ask.
Yeah, I
It
understand.
was great, Juan Carlos. It's very thought-provoking.
I know. Thank you all. I know this is a practice. I was considering this as a practice run of my thesis. So any and all feedback is much appreciated. I see that Dr. Jagdish posted a question on the chat. So it says, prepare a research paper for submission while working on the thesis. So you can do both side by side. And yes, Dr. Kuchandani, I chose this. I chose the thesis manuscript option for my program. So we're intending to submit our research for a journal. Currently in the stage where I'm just looking which journals are appropriate, but we were thinking of the Journal of Community Health and the Journal of Rural Health. And I think, since the topic revolves around COVID, I think there might be interest in the journals that we apply to. And I think, personally, I find this topic very interesting. So I'm optimistic once we start submitting our research for journal publication. And I believe there was someone else who had their hand raised. Oh, okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, very well done. It's very interesting research and very timely. I just had a question. Did you offer any incentives to the families for their participation? What do you think accounted for your response rate being higher than what you might have hypothesized? Just because we keep hearing about access to internet in some rural areas, and I'm just wondering how your respondents felt about using Qualtrics and how you enrolled them in your study.
So thank you for your question. Before I answer your question, I would just say that when we wanted to conduct the survey just in a physical form, not doing it online, but we ran into issues during the IRB approval process, just because they were saying, if we were going to do a physical copy of the survey, we could either mail it to the parents, or the teachers could mail it to the parents or pass it along with their learning packets that they were giving out at the time. But, the parents would have to return to the school and give the physical surveys to the teachers, which would, just create more parent and teacher interaction. So we had to just distribute the survey in an online format. And at first I was a little concerned with that, just giving that typically rural communities have lower access to internet or to, the types of resources that are needed to conduct or to complete an online survey. But, as you can see from our response, I think we ended up getting a very good response, especially given the characteristics of the community. We did not offer any incentive to the parents. At first, I was thinking of, doing so, but at the end, we decided not to. But I think what helped us a lot was that, I grew up in Columbus, so a lot of the elementary school teachers that are still working there, they used to be like my 3rd grade and 4th grade teachers. The school principal is one of my neighbor. She's a very nice lady, and she used to take her toddler to the swimming pool when I was a lifeguard. So I think my relationship with the school administration and the school teachers helped out a lot, because I really got to give it to the teachers. They really supported me in my research endeavors, and they really made it an effort to get their parents to complete my survey. So I would attribute the success to them.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
Okay, I have a question then.
Go ahead, Dr.
Are you going to look at the factors associated with no drop in physical activity level? What are the things that make kids resilient to the impact of COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think we can see that in our mixed effect model, because once we get the estimates, if correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Soroka, but once we, put our variables into the model, we will get our estimates. And if the estimates are negative, I believe it indicates that there was it was like a decrease in or that particular variable decreased the physical activity levels. Wait, no, I don't think I'm saying that right. But yeah, I'm currently working on the mixed effect model, so I'm still not 100% sure what variables I'm going to use. I've had to eliminate one, for example, just because all of the children and parents were Hispanic, so there was no other that classified as non-Hispanic, so we had to drop that variable out. But I think in our estimates are going to be able to tell us which factors were protective and which factors are risk factors, or that contributed to a bigger decrease in physical activity.
Because it seems like going forward, those are the things, well, I think that was part of your purpose, your second question, the things that protected kids from the effects of COVID-19 are the things we'd like to encourage and, promote in the community if we were going to, let's say, do some kind of an intervention or, some of the things that we've talked about in the past in various border communities. Right?
Yeah, no, good point. I think especially the household norms, I think are gonna particularly interesting in that, just because I wonder if, as a parent being physically active, was that gonna be a protective effect on children's physical activity levels? Because, I don't want to put my own biases into it, just being from Columbus and visiting Columbus often over the past year. But I could, over in the evenings on the weekends, I would see a lot of families going for walks, which I didn't used to see before COVID-19. And so I don't know if, that those responses where parents said that they did active things together with their children, if that actually helped mitigate some of the effects that COVID-19 may have had on their children's physical activity levels. So it is a very good question. And I think, we'll find something very interesting in the results of the mixed effect model.
Great.
Well done.
Additional questions? Okay, so.
All right.
just
Well,
wanted to-
that was great, Juan Carlos.
Good presentation.
If we
Thank
could,
you,
yeah,
everyone.
very
I
good.
appreciate you joining me on your, Friday noon hour with us.